2006 report obviously is a good one to look at and to measure where we are today as a country in 2023. It focused then, and I think it was unusual, I suppose one should say, because we are used to referring to macroeconomic trends, et cetera, but I think there's a sense that, look, there's a lot more thinking going on around social issues and social trends, and hence the kind of various themes that we identified in that 2006 report. It concluded that South Africa had been transformed on the basis of constitutional imperatives, and this had helped towards nation building and reconciliation. It cited positive public outcomes, transformation in politics, socioeconomics, and culture. But, and I think that the buts were obviously very important, that there's persistent inequality, crime, racism, uneven migration, et cetera. So in July 2019, the project partners that Siphokazi had mentioned had co-hosted the 25 years of democracy. And the conference teams looked at the past, the present, and the future. I'm not going to go into the details of that. But what was important was that the same partners then decided to let's take up the cudgels, in a sense, of reflecting on where our society is going, where these various macro-social indicators were. On your right-hand side is the list of colleagues that were involved in the project, and assuming most of them, if not all of them, are present today, apart from those that have had some clashes with meetings and things. It did the normal literature review. It makes use of qualitative and quantitative data. It did a round of interviews and drew on different disciplines and areas of specialty. So many thanks to the team that worked on it. It builds obviously on the research finding of the 2006 report, but it also looks at some key dimensions, especially the human development indicator and the macroeconomic changes that impact on macro-social trends. There are various sections that cover important developments, such as structural changes that we need to be keeping in mind that have occurred in the global context, given also the experience and the trauma of state capture, the growing influence of digital technologies in all aspects of our work and pleasure and socializing, and the new research on social cohesion in South Africa. It looks at democratic consolidation rather than focusing on transitional policy outcomes and institutional changes, which were obviously the focus of the 2006 report. And at the time when we wrote this, when it came together towards the end of last year, the 2022 report also was reflecting on the kind of social compacting processes that the president was trying to lead. Its structure, its major trends. The first chapter is actually a very good synopsis of what we need to look at. Then it goes into social structure and social mobility, diversity around race and language, diversity. Sorry, that's a repetition. Around migration, social cohesion, and organized social life and social networks. So I'm going to basically talk to the broad outline of what it does, so that when you're looking through the report, you get a chance, you've got a guide to how to manage the report itself. The aim obviously was to investigate socioeconomic structural changes and relate them to social conditions in South Africa. So the macro trends that I identified in chapter 1 have a significant impact on democratic consolidation, social cohesion, and nation building. And it's important to identify, to focus on them. And as I mentioned, important recent developments, AI being, and the whole digital economy transition, really important was and is low carbon economic policy shifts and the impact of debates and discourse around the just transition to a low carbon future and the response to state capture. This chapter is divided into 4 main themes: economic development, the whole social programs, governance, and so forth. Now, chapter 2 is quite an interesting one because it looks at social structure and social mobility. This provides quite a comprehensive assessment of South Africa's social structure mode from 2000 to 2020 by looking at race, class, gender, and age, contextual issues, such as digital and policy shifts. And then it looks at poverty and inequality trends, income and social mobility, small SMMEs, and the relevance of education and entrepreneurship. It then concludes by providing policy recommendations, which are obviously quite important for the colleagues that are gathered here today. The diversity chapter on demographics of race and language highlights that at its core, post-apartheid South Africa continues to be characterized by structural racism and unequal power relations based on race, class, and gender, by digging deep into a lot of these factors. Now, this is one of the challenges I even faced when trying to prepare this presentation, that there are a lot of issues covered in this report, and all I can do is highlight some of it. So, but please do go into these aspects, because they have tried to bring together as much of the recent data that we have available. And then obviously it shows the need, the areas that we need to be focusing on as far as policy lessons are concerned. The population by race, you've got a bit of a breakdown, but I think that the right-hand corner is quite an interesting one about which parts of so the race remains a factor, a central defining factor of South Africa's socio-economic situation. There's no getting away from it. And so, whenever people speak of trying to have race-blind policies and so forth, it's a pipe dream and will be for a long time while these factors are persistent. The right-hand one is quite an interesting one, because it captures, those that are in need of basic necessities and those that aren't. And there's no need, there's no need to even repeat at the bottom line shows who is at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of having their basic needs met, and that's Black African individuals in our society, and then colored relatively better to be using the old terminologies. And then obviously the Indian white kind of tracking in many senses is captured in this report then. The demographics, the diversity in terms of demographics of age, gender, and disability. The 2006 macro social report did get into this in a lot of detail. And what we've done is we've tried to look at what has changed since then, and present data using the most recent available data. And then migration, cause of mortality and crime. That chapter 5 looks at these divergent themes of migration, crime, and mortality. So the findings, giving you that outline, so now I can just speak briefly about the findings of these chapters. The first two obviously look at the conditions, and they look at South Africa's performance, and basically the conclusion, again, it's a quite an obvious conclusion because we talk about this all the time, is that we have declined in essential socioeconomic areas since 2006. The regression is exemplified in economic growth. I think we all know, even pre-pandemic, we had slowed down. Then there's employment, even the most recent figures by Stats SA shows that, we're well on track to remaining at 32, 33% formal definition of unemployment figure, poverty and inequality. We still remain the most unequal society in the world. Socioeconomic effects. This weakened socioeconomic performance has direct impacts on social structure and mobility. And again, the various sort of axes persist, even in the policy context, which has got transformative socioeconomic legislation and economic policies. So sobering to keep reminding ourselves that, and then hopefully inspiring us to start saying, look, what needs to happen? What are the immediate steps we need to be taking? What needs to change? 3, 4, and 5, as I said, discusses the issues around migration, security, and health. There's obviously a relationship between changing migration trends, urbanization, and spatial dynamics in society. We're now in a situation where over 65% of the South African population resides in urban areas. Increased migration in urban areas causes all kinds of other issues like social conflict and in some cases, issues around social cohesion. There's all kinds of tensions around jobs, etc., etc. And then layering of all that would be the issue of immigration, of people moving in and out of the country. Chapter 6 talks about social cohesion, and it looks at where we are on that. So it indicates a continued citizen participation in public affairs, that this participation often takes place outside political parties and structures. So and through social networks and organizations organized around pertinent social, economic, and political demands. Access to social media and digital platforms has impacted the organization of social life and social networks. And then youth-led political activity like the hashtag Fees Must Fall and Pay the Grants campaigns exemplify these new public participation strategies. These campaigns are connected to broader public policy debates and so forth. And an important question that some of us were thinking through as we were looking at this is, are we, there's always this, when we look at voting patterns, we've been seeing the decline in the number of registrations, especially amongst young people, and then further decline in the actual voting turnout. But at the same time, you've got resorting to extra parliamentary political manifestations. And one of the reports that MISRA produced on protests actually argues that there's a complementarity between what happens on the streets and what happens at the ballot box and what happens in the parliamentary context and so forth. So that's very important reading for them. It then makes some 3 simple, but obviously very deeply important recommendations for future action. Critical is rebuilding trust and legitimacy in public institutions. We need extensive measures for eradicating exclusion and inequality, and we need to incorporate and find innovative methods of building on the citizen participation that takes place outside political parties or formal political processes. No MISRA event can end without our own commercial, but I think it'll be important for you to keep an eye out for the work we're doing, which obviously has previous work has fed into the macro social report, along with the other research that are involved, but we're also continuing with some of the work as part of our own research agenda. So one of the work, we released before the last local government elections in 2021, our book on coalitions, and there's ongoing work around that. And I think you know that the Deputy President is hosting a national dialogue in Cape Town first week of August, and MISRA's book will be prominent there, and people have been, all parties, I'm glad to say, have been using it as an important sort of starting point around the discussion on coalitions. We're doing ongoing work on just transition. As we've highlighted, how this is managed is going to have a huge impact on our society. And there's obviously 2 aspects to it, the just aspect, as well as the transition. And so we've released a book on that, and we continue to work on that. We're also working hard on, and we're hoping that by late September, early October, we can publicly launch the new scenarios, what we call the 2035 scenarios, which were produced. Most of you were either interviewed or researched part of the scenarios that we did for 2030, and you were still involved in the 2035 scenarios. So that will be coming out soon. Amongst the MISRA publications that we'll be rolling out over the next 6-8 months, one, it will be the structure of the South African economy, where is it going, how has it managed the various crises since 1994. Another one would be where innovation goes to die. I think that's an important one, because we all say that, South Africa is a very South Africans, I should say, are very innovative people, but we aren't able to commercialize the kind of things that we find and so forth. So where innovation is going to die. Migration, as you saw, impacted a lot on the macro social report, and we'll be coming out with a whole publication after we've studied that. We're also looking at the state of the state. Next year is the 30th anniversary of our democracy. And we're taking a deep look into where have we come from, what have we done in the past 30 years, and where are we going to. Then there's a word that we all trying to get our tongue around, and that's the Thucydides trap. In essence, it's a classical reference to tensions between a hegemon and a rising power, and whether that leads to war or accommodation. We're seeing this being played out today, US-China rivalry in a whole range of other areas. And we're going to be looking at how does Africa position itself as this thing happened. The famous saying, the African proverb that when the elephants fight, it's the grass that dies. So, Chair, in a nutshell, that's the report, and also work that is ongoing that it would be great to keep an eye on. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And once again, we look forward to an intensive engagement over the next 2 hours.
Thank you very much, Abba, for that very concise report overview. I would like to encourage our participants to please post any questions under the Q&A. We will have a discussion after our next 2 speakers. So please do pose your questions, and please indicate if you are posing them directly to a particular panelist. And also, we have posted the link to the full report under the webinar chat so that you can basically have access to the full analysis of some of these trends, especially on the variables that are causing some of these trends. So now next we're gonna request Josephilda Nhlapo to come up and give a short response. She's joining us from the Department of Planning and Monitoring, and she's also a member of the National Planning Commission. Josephilda, if you can come and give your response.
Thank you very, very much, colleagues. I'm trying to open the video, but it looks like I'm not visible and I'm not able to improve. I've been trying to improve the sighting. It doesn't look like it is possible to improve, and I apologize profusely. I'm not joining from my office. I'm joining from somewhere in some very rural place, so I apologize profusely. I also apologize that I will not be able to stay for long, and serious apologies. So colleagues, we are to talk about the report. Just to say that a very impressive report, particularly, and now I'm going to be selfish, for us as the presidency and DPME, since we are supposed to now finalize the 30-year review report. So it has put together all of these various research that will be extremely important for writing the 30-year review. Number one, the first thing I want to say is that there's no one who can quarrel with the insights that have emerged from this report. The first insight is that socioeconomic inequality still has a significant impact on who you know, which will lead to whether you're able, for example, to quickly find a job or go up in the world. It's important. It's important for social cohesion. It's important for general organization of social life and identity. So unfortunately, we have not been able to deal with inequality in any significant way. We can even argue that we have made it worse post 1994. The second finding that we cannot quarrel with is that the socio-economic and political changes in the first decade produced very, very positive results. However, these have been reversed because of weak governance, state capture, and general poor economic performance. No one can quarrel with that finding. We can also not quarrel with the fact that we have increased access to digital platforms, and they've done a lot, particularly post COVID, which is a very good thing. So basically, we cannot quarrel with almost all of the findings that are in the report. It builds on the previous macro-social report is great, because it then, and the comparison helps us see the issues that were important then and the issues that are important now. And we see that on issues of unemployment, that's still an issue that has not been resolved, even though we've managed to do a lot around HIV AIDS, such that it no longer is as important as it was in the first macro social report. It also highlights what is extremely important and has become an important factor in the world, just a transition, because truth is the costs and externalities are going to be borne by the poor 50-year-old who's working in Wheatbank in a coal mine, or even in a generating a facility. So what happens when we quickly move on and dump our carbon based economy? So it's important that we raise this, and for us it's not just transition at a national level, but it should be just transition at a global level. Everyone must transition, and the transition must be just. I'll make a quick example of what I mean by this. The European Union recently increased its imports of coal, meaning we will then, of course, go further into digging up our coal reserve. A good thing on one hand, because we get foreign currency, but it means therefore that if we do transition, all of us must be prepared to do the right thing for the world. It should not be developing countries that are rushing around just transitioning before everyone else a transition, particularly because, as we talk all the time about the common but differentiated responsibilities that must be there at all times as we just transition. And for me, this report has resolved the debate, and maybe there wasn't, maybe one can argue that maybe there wasn't a debate, but there was a debate that maybe we shouldn't worry about an inequality for now, because eventually things will trickle down, and we all know the Kuznets curve, that inequality will increase at first, and then finally as we develop, then it will peak at mid-income level and fall as we develop further. But fortunately, this report and many other reports and research shows that it's not it isn't the case. Inequality is a constraint to economic growth, and therefore, when we deal and come up with economic policies, the economic policies must deal with both growth and inequality at the same time. It raises successes. It's not just about failures. It raises successes. The fact that 82% of South Africans now reside in formal housing, it's a good thing. The fact that sanitation has increased, it is a very good thing. But it does talk to the fact that the legitimacy of state institutions have been significantly eroded, and the levels of trust have dwindled. Now, if we are to have a social compact that will pull everyone, literally ensure that all ships rise, it will it is very difficult now with the low public trust levels. The shocking thing that we all must worry about is that South Africa ranks, according to the World Economic Forum's Global Social Mobility Report, which is highlighted here, that it ranks the worst in terms of intergenerational income mobility, that it would take South Africans, low-income families, approximately 9 generations to reach the country's median income. That, colleagues, must make us really have sleepless nights, because it means the hope that keeps people not just alive, but telling yourself that it is okay if I do the right thing, if I go to school, if then my children will do better than I have done. If that is gone, it is really a tinder that can cause an explosion. We must keep hope, and this means, therefore, we must invest very seriously on the quality of the social wage in order to reduce inequality and inequity of opportunity, and we must grow the economy. That is extremely important. Of all the priorities that we should have, there's these two, it's the greatest priority. And lastly, that race, and it's not a surprise, that race is still a huge matter for South Africa, and therefore the redress policies must still be based on race. So, colleagues, last week we had a meeting with AfriForum, and their greatest pain was that it looks like the country is now attacking Afrikaans as a language. Now, if we are talking about redress, we're talking about spatial redress, we're talking about economic redress, we're talking about all types of redress, including language redress. Now, if some elements of our population feel that they are being attacked, it means maybe we still need to have serious conversations of what needs to happen in order to redress those that were not just looked down upon, but things were taken from them, and it is for that reason that they are where they are. When that was explained in the meeting we had with AfriForum, it didn't sit in well. It really did not sit in well. We were told that instead, as government, we should be worried about crime and not necessarily be touching issues of language, even though it still is a fact that Afrikaans and English are the most used in business, workplace, and even educational settings. I just have two little critiques, though, but it isn't necessarily for the report. It is for South Africa as a whole. Most of the research that is used here is not as current as I shouldn't say most, I should say some, is not as current as we would want it to be. For example, the data on inequality is and poverty, it's 2014. That was the last time Stats SA produced a survey that can deal decisively with issues of poverty and inequality. As if that is not enough, we have decided that we are no longer we've discontinued the National Income Dynamics study that added a lot of rich data in this space. So maybe we should talk about how we invest in ensuring that research, data, surveys, etc., we continue with them. We do not at any point skimp on having this research, because then we will not have policy that is evidence based. And then the last comment I want to talk about is on SMMEs and the growth of the second economy. That the study could have benefited from the second economy, a study that was done by the presidency. If they did, and I missed it, apologies. For example, the reason why we have such a low SMME contribution to employment and GDP is largely because of massive vertical and horizontal concentration and huge barriers to entry, more than in a lack of finance and so on. It's just really difficult. And the story that I always tell is, for example, for other people in the world, maybe you can start your own bakery in the corner somewhere. But for South Africa, it is really difficult to compete with the major four food industries that process the flour and then the bake cake, and then you and are then able to use apologies, I'm being disturbed, but then they are able to use their fact that they have access to the inputs in bulk, making it cheaper, and economies of scale, etc., etc., etc. In other countries, that is not the case, but in South Africa, it is, and therefore, it's very difficult to start your own bakery. It's possible, but it is very difficult to start your own bakery, and it is supposed to compete not only with the products of these four, but also with the products of the other four, the spas, that make their own bread, etc. So I'm just saying that it would have been great to have that as well, so that when we debate on why SMMEs are not where they are supposed to be, and yet we're expecting them to mop up unemployment, let's look at everything that we have on our disposal. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you very much. It really was a pleasure to read the report and pick up what I think are extremely important issues that we should talk about. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Josephilda, for that. I think your contribution is going to tempt me to request that some of our contributors to the MSR report who are in attendance can address some of your questions, especially around the issues on SMMEs, and as well as the challenges around, data collection and stuff like that. So please, I see you, Kwezi. So during the discussion, I would like to request you to please respond to some of Josephilda's points. I'm just preparing you now, and you can think about your response while we call on Khulekani Mathe, the Deputy CEO of Business Unity South Africa, to come up and give us a business perspective, basically, or business response of this report. Over to you, Khulekani. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director, and good afternoon to everybody. Just to perhaps reflect on the report itself, and also what are some of the points that one would have liked to see in the report, because if we don't do that, we will end up just being praised singers for how good the report is, which it is. Let me just say that I am going to make observations as a South African, not necessarily as a representative of business, because I don't think that that would be fair on me to do that as if this was discussed by business and some sort of view formulated by business on these issues. So the first thing I would like to say is a series of questions for me are raised by this report in various parts of it. The striking thing is, why is the apartheid picture not changing or not changing fast enough in relation to how the different race groups have performed in the last couple of years, or in the period that the report looks at. So you still see the kind of same ranking that you had during apartheid, where on many indicators, white people do well, followed by the Indian community, and then colored and Africans. That does not seem to have changed as a picture. Within that, there may be minor changes, but as a kind of macro trend, that hasn't changed. And so I think we need to spend some time grappling with this question, because I think I would have been one of the people in the earlier years defending the pace of change, arguing that give things time, there will be change, etc., etc. But 30 years down the line, this seems to remain as it has always been. The second question that one is forced to ask by the data in this report is really the question of whether have we as South Africans given up on the idea of a kind of a diverse democracy that we are supposed to be actually working, right? Because again, if you look at everything, you get a sense that with all that we share is this geographical space called South Africa. On most other things, we live different lives. We go to different schools, etc., etc. And of course, there are minor changes on the margins, but by and large, the race being a dominant factor that influences, if not determine, most things, does lead one to ask this question. And I think that has to be followed by, but why is that the case? Who is letting us down, right? We know who is, or which group or groups are negatively affected by the situation remaining largely unchanged, but who benefits from it? If it benefits nobody, why is it allowed to continue the way it has? And then, the report does deal with some of the major trends, whether it's migration and all of that, but there are patterns that we begin to see anecdotally, and I accept that there may not be, data that you can use in a serious report like this, but what you're seeing is that there are new cities and enclaves that are being, or at least that are forming in our cities, as more and more sort of Black people move into what was previously white areas. White people are running away and starting other cities, whether it's Steyn City in the case of Joburg and other like settlements. Again, this raises these questions. Is it because we cannot coexist that these things happen. Now, of course, I'm being crude about these things, but the reality is that within these new settlements that I'm referring to, there are Black people there as well. They are mixed in their own way, but in the sort of high-level sense, that does not take away from the major trend, which is that you get the predominantly white population moving further and further away as Black people move in. And so you then deal with, in the report, I think tangentially and insufficiently, with crime in our society. And this raises for me questions not about the report, but about us as a society. Why is it that crime is able to continue in the way that it has? And in a sense, an increased brazenness in the perpetration of crimes that are taking place in South Africa. So I think teasing out what is happening there would be useful for us as a society. I mean, I will make an example. We had what was characterized or called xenophobic attacks in 2008. What we did very well is to argue and show that, no, it's not xenophobic attack. But we didn't deal with whatever you called it, the actual act that was happening. Because whether these crimes are driven by xenophobia as defined, but the fact is, foreign nationals continue to be attacked and get killed in South Africa, right? It is not uncommon to hear that, oh, a foreign national was killed in Diepsloot, in Alex, here and there. So yes, we've managed to argue that it's not xenophobia, but the act of crimes against foreign nationals continue, in the same way that crimes against different groupings within South Africa, South Africans themselves, continue. So for me, the big issue is, but why is it that we are successful in calling things differently rather than dealing with the act itself when it comes to crime? So I think that the report would have done us a huge favor by really looking at how this thing has evolved from the shock around 2008, from the so-called xenophobic attacks, and how this has evolved and how it continues. Because if we don't, then many other things like that will continue. We've just had the July unrest about 2 years ago. Shocked us, shocked me, but do we know enough to be able to deal with these things and prevent them from happening? And you see, again, this sort of brazenness, whether it manifests in the form of construction mafia or in the form of the so-called zamazamas, illegal activity all around continues. Why is that so? Is it because the state is failing in its duty to deal with criminality such that these things can continue? Why is that the case? And so to me, there are all of these questions about why, as a society, we seem to, on many of these issues that were dealt with in the 2006 report, not progressed as much as we should have, and in many instances regressed. So one of my bugbears, and I will stop here, is again along the theme of whether we've given up on actually becoming a diverse group of people who can coexist in a country. Why is it continuing that you still have households that are monolingual in a country that has 11 official languages, that it's fine as, that you only speak one language. And I'm particularly raising this in relation to our colleagues and counterparts who speak only English or maybe only Afrikaans. Why is that acceptable that you can raise your kids in a country that you were born in to only speak one language? What does that say about your commitment to your fellow countrymen and women? So these are questions that we should be asking ourselves. Why is this thing happening if we are in fact committed to making South Africa work and work for everybody? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Khulekani, and thank you to all our speakers today. They all share something in common. They've been members of the National Planning Commission. I think Josephilda and Abba are still active, and Khulekani used to be secretary for the NPC. It's now time for our discussion. We've got two channels. We've got the Q&A channel, or you can either put your hand up so that we can open up the discussion to the floor. So far, we do have two comments or questions in the Q&A. Abba, this one was directed to you by Zach Wood, and he wants to find out about the T-trap of the US and China shifting hegemony. Are you exploring, or do you have any thoughts on potential similar hegemonic or leadership shifts in South Africa? And then we've got one by Betty Makubu. She did not direct this to anyone in particular, but she's basically asking about unemployment, and she's finding out, I guess maybe Josephilda, if you're still online, maybe you can tackle this one regarding unemployment, graduate unemployment, and they basically asking if placing more teachers than nurses in posts would not contribute to a reduction in unemployment. And then they have a follow-up question on why there has not been arrest on the Zondo Commission, and also the issue of crime, including pensioners and being raped regularly. Can government do better? Issue of monitoring is key, and we must see some improvements. So if Josephilda, you can assist with that, but please feel free, if you're not comfortable, to answer some of the questions, especially ones not related to the report. Please feel free to say you're not comfortable with that. But I'd like to please encourage colleagues to please put up your hands so that we can have a nice and robust discussion. And we've already received quite a lot of feedback, even from our panelists, regarding the report. So we'd like to find out some more. And Kwezi, can you please put up your hand, please? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Kwezi is one of the contributors in the report, and I feel like some of the questions will be relevant to him. Okay, Abba, you can go first.
Okay, I'll do the first one that Zach has raised, because I think the other ones are even more complex. So I'll leave that to the people with the gray cells. So Zach, I think that's an important question you're raising. I think and it's something that I've been addressing also publicly in my Business Day column and that kind of thing. In fact, my last column was reflecting on Mandela's legacy and the kind of leadership that we can see coming, especially from the party that Mandela was associated with. I think, you know, I think the 30 years of democracy should be a point for us to reflect on a number of issues. Critical amongst us is the kind of leadership that we want as a country to take us forward over the next few decades. You know, there's so many changes, but you know, one of the things that I've learned is that there's nothing more powerful than generational change. So, you know, you've seen the impact that has had on different societies, different countries. You know, so a young Che Guevara and a young Fidel Castro take on quite a, well, corrupt, but quite a powerful regime. A young Thomas Sankara takes on a whole struggle. A young Mandela, Sisulu, Tambo, you know, although they were mentors to Madiba, you know, so generational change is, for me, very important. Whether that's going to shift who's the hegemon that emerges in South Africa over the next elections and the next decade, I think remains to be seen. So if I think you're referring to political leadership, then I think the political parties would need to have a truly deep reflection on, are they actually in touch with the kind of really deep changes that we're seeing, transformational changes we're seeing in society and in the world. And I think, you know, for the Mistra and for the Indlulamiti Scenarios project, that the one that we did previously, we referred to institutional capacity and leadership. We didn't emphasize the state over alles. We said that this leadership issue is all over, whether you look at business, you look at sporting organizations, you look at faith-based organizations, etc. There's no one particular sector that's standing out, that even coming to the fore and saying, we'll provide leadership, you know, or we'll be the hegemon in this period or not, and that kind of thing. So I think we're at that moment, and you know, I don't want to cop out and say, let's watch that space and see what happens. But I think it's going to be whoever emerges or whatever emerges, you know, political force, a new social movement, etc., would be one that has been able to capture this moment well and to set the agenda for the next decade. I hope that helps. Thanks, Chair.
Just I feel that do we still have you on the line?
You do actually. Is it clearer now? Am I more visible? But that's not the problem. So I will respond mainly on, if we were monitoring, we would be performing better. The fact is that the monitoring happens, and it happens almost at all levels. Let me talk about the monitoring done only by the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation. We look at the indicators that are in the medium-term strategic framework, which is the 5-year plan, trying to implement the NDP. And we then go and report against performance at cabinet with the president and his executive there on progress against those indicators. And we do that every 6 months. The question that we need to ask ourselves is that without proper, if I can call it proper, accountability, and at all levels, it does not matter how much you monitor, how much one monitors, the performance should be driven, if not by because it is the right thing to do, but because someone is managing that performance and enforcing the various carrots and sticks that come with a driving performance. So yeah, then the second one, maybe that I can respond to, is that true? If we could hire more teachers, hire more nurses, and indeed social workers, because we need social workers considering the trauma and the generational trauma that is inflicted on all of us because of our past. It would move the needle, because every job counts. But we do have a challenge of a civil service that cannot take more. Whether the civil service is properly configured is something else that can be discussed. But right now, the civil service cannot increase beyond the current approved establishment. Maybe we need to reconfigure and ensure those that are at the coalface, those that deliver the social wage are properly, they are there. There's enough a component, establishment a component. Thanks, colleagues. The other very difficult ones, I propose that we all debate them here and maybe come up with proposals around that. Thanks.
Thank you. Kulegani?
I mean, there isn't any question that is directed at me necessarily, but I do just want to make one observation, because some of the questions kind of hint at these things, is that one of our big problems actually is just lack of accountability, because we've known about these things that need to be fixed, whether it's crime, whether it's the performance of various parts of our institutions. We've even created, now over 10 years ago, a department of monitoring, planning, monitoring, and evaluation, because there was a belief that with better data put in front of decision makers, the cabinet, that there would be a greater accountability and improved performance. It has not happened. So South Africa's problem is that we just do not hold leaders accountable. We do not hold people in positions, whether they're leaders or not, accountable. So you can be a police officer, not do your job, you're not held accountable, or you can be a minister, not do your job, you're not going to be held accountable. So I think until we take that seriously, many things are going to continue to slip through our fingers. Thanks.
Thank you, Kulegani. I will now take on the hands that are up. If we can ask our hosts to please give them permission to talk. We'll start with Khotso, followed by Kwezi, and then JP Landman. Khotso, over to you.
Hello.
Hi, Khotso. We can hear you. Hello, Khotso. Okay, can we move on to Kwezi so long while Khotso sorts his audio out?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll be limited to 2 responses because, as you said, you hijacked me. But so on the first one, in relation to crime and the persistence of crime, I think one of the things that we try to highlight in the report, and that's highlighted in other research in South Africa and across the world, is the link between heightened crime and inequality in societies. And I think that that's one of the things we often neglect or overlook when we debate crime, because we mostly focus on the efficacy of the justice system or on policing, which is correct as well. but we often overlook this link to the between crime and inequality. And tied to that also is the question around the role of community participation and organizations in addressing crime and also in preventing crime. And that speaks to examples such as Community Policing Forum and other structures that are there. And I think this is important because I don't think we can only rely on just state security institutions to address the questions of crime. And then the second point around the SMMEs is that the report does reference or highlight the work that MISTRA has done previously on rethinking the whole debate around SMMEs and Black economic empowerment. And I think there are 4 lessons there. The one is that, the failures of SMMEs cannot be reduced to just education and skills, but has to do also with market structure issues, concentration, competition, and the likes. The second issue there is also rethinking BEE, because mostly the focus on BEE has been on listed entities and the transformation-only listed companies. And we know that that's not where most SMMEs operate. So there needs to be a balanced approach to rethinking BEE that doesn't just focus on essentially financial transactions in the listed space. And then the third one is also linking the question around SMME sustainability to economic restructuring and building value chains, especially value chains in new or nascent markets or sectors. And then how do you also link SMME creation to not just jobs, but also links to attaining other socio-economic multiplier effects that go beyond just employment, such as access to public goods and localization and the likes. So that's what I want to say about the SMME debate. And the other details on that are contained in MISTRA's book on rethinking BEE. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kwezi. Khotso, can we try you again? Hi, Khotso, you may talk.
Hello, my name is Tammy Mazwai, and I'm not Khotso because I keep on seeing that there's a sort of link between me and Khotso.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. Maybe Khotso shared a link with you.
Oh, I see. No, I suspect that's the case. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry about it. It's my name is Tammy Mazwai, and I just wanted to congratulate to thank the presentations that have just been made, and to say that that one really welcomes such an honest approach to looking at the crisis we find ourselves in today. Now, I want to refer to an issue that was raised by Dr. Abba, the issue of rebuilding trust. It is very critical that we should rebuild trust between communities, between various class structures in our country, because our country is very complex in terms of the social relationships and so on, not only in terms of color, but in terms of ethnicity and other social divisions. So this rebuilding trust has to be linked to what one would call economic equality, because whilst our country is complex in terms of many issues, as I've started out, but on the issue of equality and poverty, it is quite clear who are at the bottom of the scrap heap. It will be Black women, Blacks in general, and so on. And to expect these people to really to put trust at the top of the agenda is unfortunately not something that is not realistic thinking. So the worsening levels of inequality, instead of rebuilding trust, are going to worsen the crisis in our country. What we lack in our country is a lack of massive movement in terms of growth from below. Growth from below is the strategy of trying to empower the tens and thousands of small businesses on the ground. Because when they start, when you have that growth from below, you are fighting a lot of other issues, social ills that are besetting communities. Instead, we seem to have put our trust in growth from above, the neoliberal approach or the trickle-down approach, which really has not been effective all these years. And if at all I may add, the two are not mutually exclusive. I believe that Mrs. Joseph Fielder has made a pertinent point, just as Kwesi has done, in talking of the horizontal and vertical linkages that are a feature of our economy. With all respect, no strategy has come forward to deal with these vertical and horizontal leakages. And until we deal with them, we're just, winking in the dark. One must say that the second point that one must make is that there also does not seem to have a government pulling in the same direction in terms of small business development. In the first place, the Department of Small Business Development has the smallest budget when the Treasury, when the Minister of Finance announces his budget. Yet, this is supposed to be the department that must deal with the biggest challenge that is facing our country. So the budget, the small business development shows the extent to which government takes small business department seriously. It just does not think that small business development is a critical element in terms of small business development. Then the second point in which I would like to make is that where I think that there is no cohesion in government is we've just announced that there is the National Health Insurance. 3 years ago, there was a meeting between the Department of Health and the people who are dealing with NHI in the Department of Health and the National Planning Commission. And what we wanted to find out from the National Planning Commission was if there were any strategies for small business development that are integral to national health insurance, as is the case in many other countries. And the response we got was zilch, that this issue has not yet even been raised. Now, here is a new government program coming. It does not address the challenge facing the country, that of small business development, because NHI is going to be driven by small companies on the ground, but the Department of Health has not factored that in. But what I think that is the biggest crime that we have committed as a country, when we decided on the social grants, and then we apart from the fact that they were being distributed through the post office, we also ensured, we also gave checkers the right to distribute the grants. Now, here is a country that says that we want to build the small businesses on the ground. And the small business on the ground, their area of operation is the retail sector. And then people now go and fetch their grants from checkers. Obviously, they are going to buy all they need at checkers. And therefore, what it means that it must the small businesses on the ground that used to get support from the pensioners and the youth who used to get these grants, that is now lost to the small businesses or the sectors on the ground. I am not saying that the checkers should not be used because it has got a lot of outlets, but also I'm saying that we should have thought this further instead of now making sure that small businesses, instead of them growing, they then get destroyed. For instance,
I'm going to ask you to wrap up, Dr. Mazwai.
Yes, no, fine. I'm just wrapping up. What I want us to go to factor in now is that there are 2 million South Africans that go to bed hungry every night. And there are 12 million South Africans who are dependent on 350 Rand per month. 350 Rand does not even fill a basket or a trolley at any supermarket. This is the crime that is being visited on millions of our people. Let us be very aggressive in growing small business on the ground because they can do the work much more better of fighting against poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mazwai. Can we then have JP before we go back to our panelists?
Good afternoon, Chairperson, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you also to Mistra for organizing this research and doing this publication and bringing us together on this very, very important topic. I really appreciate it. I just want to comment on the issue of measurement. With Dr. Mazwai and Gulekani and also Joseph Fielder, I served together with other people on the second Planning Commission. And Dr. Mazwai and others will remember that for 4 of the 5 years that commission was in existence, we spent the time on what we measure in our national life, what we measure in what government is doing and implementing. And the overarching conclusion that the Second National Planning Commission came to, and that report is available in the Commission, was that we were not measuring the right things. In our national life and at the level of the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, we were putting the focus on inputs. We were putting the focus on what we were doing. How much money we spend, how many people we employ in, say, education or in the health sector or in the police force. We focused on inputs. What we did not do, we did not focus on the outputs or what we achieve. So in crime, for example, there would be a lot of discussion about the money that we spend on a police force, legislation that has been changed, resources that go into the judicial sector, and so on and so forth, justice and crime sector, but we do not actually look at what is coming out on the other side. And I think we will in 5 years' time again ask ourselves, if we do not change from an input to an output measurement, we will in 5 years' time again ask ourselves, why are we still talking about this? Why have we not made progress? I think we can all agree that we haven't made the progress that we would have liked to see in the social life of our country. We really should have been further down the road than what we are. And measuring the correct things is absolutely an essential part of that. And in the past, we haven't done that. If we want to take the country forward, we will have to look very critically at what we measure and how we measure so that we can correct our policies and our actions and get more concrete results. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go back now to our panelists. We've mostly had rather comments rather than questions. So I would like to field a few from the Q&A. There's a question on why is the National Development Plan not placed at the center of our national development ambitions? And there's a question about public trust. How can it be restored? And also a question on BE again. Could the promotion of BE participation by all not change the entrenched negative practices and perceptions about this matter? So I think I will ask you, Abba, to tackle the one on the NDP. And Joseph Fielder, if you can maybe make comments based on the contributions by Dr. Mazwai and Kwezi and some of JP Landman's comments regarding the SMMEs, that would be nice. And you, Khulekani, actually. And yeah, we'll take it from there. First, we'll go for Abba.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. I'm glad you didn't ask me to answer Ishmael Makabela's questions, whom I respect immensely. Maybe I could just comment on the first part about where he says, how could we restore betrayed public trust and legitimacy of South Africa's failing and corrupt government? I suppose the easiest answer is to make sure that it doesn't fail and it stop being corrupt. I think that's about the only way we can achieve that, Ish. So, but in as much as I'm sounding facetious, that there's a long, long haul we've got to go through before we restore, not family trust, before we restore the nation's trust in government. And I think we can only do that if we effective, we delivering, we're putting public service above everything else, and we keep the citizenry in mind. I think the question on the National Development Plan and making the center of all consideration, it's a really, really important question. I currently serve on the National Planning Commission, as the chair has mentioned, and we're really struggling with that. So I think Khulekani was the Secretary of the National Planning for quite a while. There's been all kinds of ways that have been institutionalized to say that all government planning should reference the National Development Plan. But, you know what it's like when compliance is a tick box issue. It's just, you say, I'm doing this, and this complies, or this is aligned to the National Development Plan. And I think we're going to need, and that's part of the kind of leadership question that Zach was raising as well, that, how do we get a leadership that places a plan? I'm not entirely wedded to the National Development Plan. It was a lot of work and it's done great stuff. I think I've been arguing we need to move on from there. But notwithstanding that, we need a leadership that puts it at the front and center and says, we're going to drive this and, we're going to achieve these goals and things. So, this is now the third National Planning Commission. The previous National Commission reviewed and did a whole review, etc. In a few weeks' time, we're hoping to release a 10-year review of the National Development Plan because, it was released in 2013. And you're going to find that, we're going to start fudging the figures again. We're going to say, oh, well, we can't reduce unemployment by so-and-so date by 2030 as planned. So maybe we should revise that. But it's going to all come to nothing if the leadership isn't driving this thing. So that's the first thing. The other thing, I think just to mention to colleagues like JP Landman and Tami Mzwai, who were in the previous National Planning Commission, we're finally getting a dashboard that will be monitoring a lot of, obviously, when you identify targets and things, it takes a while. You should be identifying your indicators at the same time. But I think most of you, if you're honest about your planning process, we don't always do it well. So we've got a dashboard that CSIR has helped us develop, and we're just fine-tuning that. In fact, today, I was in a meeting where we were discussing the launch of that, and I was saying, please make it idiot-proof. It must be something I can work with. So they promised that they're going to test it on me. If it works with me, then they think it's ready for the public. But having transparency around where we are on the delivery and the implementation of the National Development Plan would be one small but important part of making sure that we put it at the center of all our departmental work. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Abba. Josephilda.
Thanks, colleagues. I don't even know where to start, except maybe to re-emphasize that one, it is important to have data on impact, and it's one of the things that I was complaining about, that we do not have enough. So we may and when we do report, we do try to report on impact and outputs, but without the research, without up-to-date surveys, it makes no sense. And the reason why there is concentration on the inputs, it is because the assumption is that if the theory of change is correct, then the inputs will lead to the required outputs. And as Dr. Abba has said, and everyone here knows, it is extremely difficult to come up with smart indicators, the measurability thereof, and therefore colleagues do the best that they can, but of course there's always improvement. At the core of us not meeting our of the objectives of the plan is non-implementation and the fact that there's no accountability, and the corruption is in the public sector. I agree, but the corruptee is almost always the private individuals in the private sector. So it is also about the values that we hold as a country. It makes no sense to collect as much riches as it is and steal from the poor, which is what is currently happening, but it is happening. So this leadership, this broad-based leadership that the National Development Plan calls for, as well as values, that we are losing. So yeah, it's just, it is about implementation. It is about accountability. We can measure ad nauseum unless there is accountability, and we will not move. Accountability, and once you measure, you come back and say, okay, we are losing track. Let's come back this way and be on track again. So unless we feed back, and unless we implement, and unless we've got the proper values, we will be here again next year, or maybe the next years to come. In 2030, we will discover that we have not implemented the development plan. Thanks, colleagues.
Thanks, Josephilda. Kulekani.
Thanks, Chair. Just to reflect on two issues and comment on two issues. Firstly, to welcome the comment by Kwezi on the need to relook at BEE and how we have implemented it to this point. I think approaching 30 years since we attained our democracy must force us to really look at areas where we have not succeeded, ask tough questions, change course where necessary. So I agree with him fully on that. I don't think it helps to simply doing the same thing and hoping for different results as we seem to have done. I'm not arguing that BEE is not necessary. I think it is necessary, but it needs to be done right. Maybe different kinds of instruments, maybe looking at different kinds of policies to make sure that we drive transformation in our society. Second comment I want to make, because the theme of accountability is so important, we really, as South Africans, ought to have start a big campaign to make sure that the recommendations of the Zondo Commission are implemented, because within it lies a lot of what we need to have accountability. If we don't do that, if we allow those in leadership to pick and choose what they want to implement, have excuses for why some people who are fingered in the reports are not investigated and brought to book, I'm afraid the question asked by Ish about rebuilding trust will not be achieved. The National Development Plan and its implementation, I will use one anecdote. One of the chapters or recommendations in the NDP that received quite a bit of pushback, even from some parts in government, was the one to do with the governance of state-owned entity, the division of labor in terms of who does what, setting out the roles of the executive authorities, the ministers, the boards, the CEOs, etc., etc. If you look at that, those recommendations, there was pushback against them, essentially arguing that those who are in government should have a greater say in the appointment of CEOs, etc., etc. Now, we didn't know what we know now at the time, but what has happened since, we know about the grand scale corruption that happened. So again, it makes you wonder whether there was complete buy-in to the NDP to start with. I would argue that there are certain sections in government that did not, and there are sections that did. And again, we need to watch out for these things because they will continue. So once we adopt a plan or a policy as society, we should have mechanisms for holding those in power accountable, including, for instance, those in the private sector, where the private sector is required to do certain things, we must equally hold them accountable. The fact that in this country, we don't hold people accountable is, in my view, what sets us back on all aspects of our development and progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Kholekani. I will take, I think, what will be the last round of questions. We'll start with Shada, and then after Shada, it's Ashraf. If anyone has anything pressing, please put up your hand, as this will most probably be the last round of the Q&A.
Thank you so much. I'm very aware that this is about a macro-social report and not a macroeconomic report. Nonetheless, the issue of small business development has come up a few times, and I really appreciate the opportunity that there are so many good ears in the space that I think there are a few points that need to be made about small business development. Firstly, I really truly take the point about how competitive the environment is and how difficult it is for, that barriers to entry are very high. However, with so many people who are on the Planning Commission, I do want to mention that I think that we could make better inroads into small business development if we started looking at the linkages between tertiary education and business development and, entry levels. For example, it was mentioned in this discussion that, in fact, we've done very well on housing. However, if we are doing well and we continue to do well in housing, there are opportunities for artisans to graduate into being small businesses. And those are likely to create a fairly stable layer of skilled businesses. The other area, and this also links to preferences, and if we, people are still stuck living in apartheid areas, then tastes and preferences also follow those areas. It's unfortunate, but that's a reality. Food value addition to food, and even there can be a linkage from technical education standards and entry into those businesses. So I really, those are the points I want to make. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shada, for that. Ashraf?
Thank you very much. I just want to make 3 quick points and then ask a question. The first point is that when at the turn of democracy, we were establishing our policies, it was the height of the World Trade Organization and all that other kind of stuff. And the commitments we made at that point led and accelerated the deindustrialization of South Africa. So it's the post-apartheid government that accelerated its deindustrialization. The second point I want to make is, at the same time, this concept of new public management was at its height. So you had this concept of 5-year contracts for senior government officials. You had the municipal finance structuring the way it is currently, and we now know that it's not working. And then the third point is that when it comes to spatial structuring, we simply adopted what most other countries have been doing, and that is the concept of transport-oriented development. In fact, we even use the language that we don't use in South Africa, called transit-oriented instead of transport-orientated. So we wholesale accepted those things, and as a result of which, we invested billions in our transport infrastructure that has accelerated the apartheid spatial structure. And so my question is, so in addition to dealing with corruption and all those things that we need to do, implementing Zondo and that kind of stuff, shouldn't we as the national, or shouldn't we ask of the National Planning Commission whether they shouldn't be revisiting or reflecting on the fact that South Africa, the post-apartheid South Africa, was an experiment for international agencies, and that we have failed as a result of those experiments, and maybe we should start looking at more indigenous and locally appropriate policies and concepts that will reindustrialize the country in the context of the 21st century and so forth, and relook at the way in which we look at space, so that we look at space as a matter of building new cities on the ashes of this, what we have right now, rather than accelerating what has been developed in the past. So that's just a thought I'd like to place. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashraf. Kungile? Hi, Kungile, you may speak.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone for the contributions. They are quite very interesting and important. And the truth is that I will somehow be repeating some of the things that have been said. But I felt like, I guess, if I contributed in the way that I want to articulate it, it might sound a bit different. Mine is, are we able to link the social, for example, racism, to inequalities together with structural change development? Structural change development will be looking at all different industries, be it telecommunication, infrastructure, construction, and all these different types of industries, because some of them, I feel that we are less investing on them, and a particular group it's a group that is mostly putting more into these industries in terms of investment, or either in terms of human capital. And in that way, it creates inequality, because particular groups in terms of demographics and that, be it in Eastern Cape versus Limpopo, be it white versus African, all these different groupings of people, once they concentrate in a particular industry, let's say telecommunication, for example, they tend to dominate that space. And when we are trying to push transformation, it looks like we are not linking the gap of transformation or unemployment to set industries. There are industries that are being not trusted as primary or as important industries in our economy. I'm not meaning primary as in the form of mining or agriculture, but I was meaning primary in the form of importance. And then there is also that aspect of certain industries like those I've just mentioned, primary, which are mining and agriculture, which are also dominated by also a minority group, which I believe is that minority group do get subsidies from government from time to time to boost our economy. But when we are facing all these challenges in our economy, we then have a problem to say that young boy who is in a township, where exactly can we allocate him in terms of now the industry spaces that we have? Or do we think that this young boy just needs to be employed anywhere? How are we capacitating that young boy? How are we capacitating them so that they can fill a space in construction or manufacturing? Or are we capacitating that young boy to fill a space in technology and so forth? Or are we just saying people are unemployed and we don't even know where they we can merit their skills? Or is it because they do not have necessary or required skill in all these different industries that I've mentioned? One last part, I wrote a letter to the president asking him that you have these people that you are giving 350. Why not take them to a college of some sort? You can even increase that money to 1,000 as long as you give them skills to fix, you know, a best in their township. You know, once there is a storage best or any type of a problem, a pole, you know, that needs to be fixed, or a school wall that needs to be fixed. You have these people, you have trained them, you've given them technical skills to actually fix these things, but you are giving people 350 and then they are redundant. You can't even use them. You know, they jump storage water in their township, and it makes no sense because they need to be contributing into our economy, because at least they are getting something. And I promise you, once you start giving people something to do, it doesn't matter the money that you are giving them, but because they feel that they are putting value into the economy, I'm telling you, the economy will change. We will have less of these crimes that we are experiencing in our society, and people will feel of value. I mean, you have schools that are closing. I mean, in our township and in our rural areas, those schools can be used as technical colleges just to learn, you know, basic technical skills to fix stuff and so forth, and painting and all those things. I mean, you have schools that needs to be painted, but you have people who are getting money but cannot, you know, participate in those spaces. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kungile, and thank you to everyone that participated in the discussion. In the interest of time, I do want to ask panelists. We did lose Joseph Fielder to another engagement, but just for Kulegani and Abba to please just conclude or wrap up this discussion, a minute each, please.
I'll let Kulegani go first.
Let me go first, and Abba, being a senior, will have the last word.
I'm very senior, but Kulegani is the wiser.
So just to say that to really welcome the report and the fact that it got us talking, because it raised a whole range of issues, and and also kind of highlighted where we have dropped the ball, as it were. I think we should do more than talking. I think we should really start being hard on ourselves and committing to address the issues where, as a society, we seem to have fallen back, because not doing so does spell gloom for ourselves, for our economy, and for those who come after us. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Kolekani. I always like his brevity and his wisdom. So I think from my side also, to keep it short, you know, the report is intense. It's and I think it's impressive as well. I can say that, especially since I wasn't involved, but thanks to Kwesi and the team that worked on it, you know, you've marshaled incredible other reports, etc. You've laid the basis for a lot of discussion. I think the last few inputs from Sharjah and Ashraf, I think raised, you know, a lot of questions. I want to suggest that please be engaged with this, with the work that MISTRA is doing. Please attend our functions. We love these kind of engagements. But ultimately, you know, we have to be the change we want to see. We have to be active citizens ourselves. We need to find ways that we keep our executive accountable, our judiciary clean, our legislature improve its operation. There's a lot to be asked for there. But there's a lot we can do as individuals and citizens. And that's my only message to end this thing on today. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you, Abba, as well as Kolekani and Joseph Fielder for a really interesting discussion. Now we're going to ask Xolelwa Kashekatia. Xolelwa is a former director here at MISTRA. However, she is now the managing director at Maruping, the official interpretation center for the Cradle of Humankind. Xolelwa was also part of the team that produced the microsocial report. So she'll be basically giving us closing remarks and offering her reflections on today's discussion. Thank you, Xolelwa.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to everyone who's still in attendance. And I'd like to first and foremost thank the MISTRA team for finally releasing this very important report, and also acknowledging the panelists who presented and also spent some time unpacking the macrosocial report. And I mean, I was fortunate enough to have been part of the team that saw the realization of this report. And I just wanted, just as a start, to maybe put some context into in how the report came about, because as mentioned by Abba when he started, this was a follow-up to the 2006 macrosocial report, which was released by PICAS in the presidency. And you must recall that also, I mean, in 2006, it was before the National Development Plan. So that is the context. However, as we were trying to put together the report, we had to be mindful of the continuities and hence the structuring of the report. So we had to still try to ensure that we're looking at the social conditions, the demographics, migration, and so on. However, there were some areas of disconnect, especially where the previous report spoke to identities, you know, social networks, and so on. And we find that in the current landscape, these now have morphed into a broader subject matter, which is social cohesion, and hence that the last chapter is slightly different from what was there in 2006. So one of the struggles then would be ensuring continuity while being mindful of the fact that the country has changed. Because in 2006, the idea, or really the impetus behind the production of the macro-social report, was to measure actually how material conditions have changed in society, but also since the beginning of the democratic dispensation, the idea was to look at how identity formation, or the process thereof, is unfolding, but also how society is reorganizing itself. And then you fast forward to 2018, when we started with this work, when we started with the work around preparing for the 25 years of democracy, and into the present, where we released this report. So in terms of measurement, which came up strongly during the discussions by the respondents in particular, we in questions of measurement or data collection and how these things are organized, and also the critique on the National Development Plan. So also we tried to make sure that we find those synergies. How do we then take forward the work of the 2006 macro-social report, infusing some of the elements of the National Development Plan? So it was quite complex, but I commend the team in actually producing this, which was actually done in collaboration with the University of Johannesburg. Now, when you look at the report, and what it finds is that really the crux of it is that there is an issue with the legitimacy of government. And secondly, the issue of trust, trust deficiencies amongst citizens, the lack of trust in institutions, in particular, democratic institutions. And the report also makes some recommendations towards how these things can be addressed going forward. And it alludes to the restructuring of the economy. And this would be to address the inequality that we have, in all its forms. And examples of how this can be done is the National Health Fund, the NHI, which was mentioned several times, but also basic income grant. However, when I pay attention to what the respondents had to say, the issue of SMMEs came up very, very strongly. Once again, Kulekani was asking the question why there is still no change. So many years, we now looking towards 30 years since democracy, and yet there's still no change. Examples around language were made there. And also this creation of new enclaves, which seems to intensify inequality in our country, and how then the inequalities also correlate to crime. And I mean, if you look at the work that Mistra is also doing with Indlulamiti, with Indlulamiti essay scenarios, you will see there that inequality is actually identified as the key driver that has the strongest pull towards us being this country that is not cohesive enough. So because of inequality, we are not finding each other as a society. And then you look at how the participants also were raising issues of unemployment, and also how there's still no consequences since the Zondo Commission. And the issue of crime, again, it keeps coming up. And also the idea of how to tap into the just transition, which I think we did not quite address effectively. But where crime was concerned, Kwezi managed to come in there to actually, forge that linkage between crime and inequality, but also highlighting the role of communities, in particular community policing. Dr. Mazwai also speaks to SMMEs, which I know is something that he's really interested in. But what was interesting there is how he then finds a connection between the role of SMMEs and the NHI, which is something that we could possibly look at as we move forward. Personally, in my own reflections upon looking at this work, even though there is a chapter on migration and it attempts to make that linkage with the 2006 report, there's still very little that's being said about inward migration, which is something that seems to be coming up very strongly in the recent past. And again, and I think this links to Kulegani's notion of naming, we always have these names and labels such as xenophobic attacks and so on, without dealing with the issues, in a more pointed manner. So that's something that I would encourage going forward, because I do know that MISTRA also does have an interest in continuing with the work of producing a macro-social report, because that was the idea. It's just that it ended in 2006. We picked up on it now, and hopefully that's something that can continue so that we can get a more holistic view on how the country is moving. So I would recommend that we take a closer look at migration, because one of the research findings from the United Nations in particular is that South Africa is actually a destination of choice, and that leads to South Africa welcoming or receiving more migrants than any country in the world. You can go to Europe, you can look at the whole sub-Saharan Africa. The numbers are quite startling. And also another issue that may need closer attention going forward, which is a ticking time bomb, is this youth alienation, which then speaks to unemployment and so on. Yes, the report does speak to new youth movements and ways and modalities through which the youth connect and mobilize and do their politics. However, there needs to be special attention taken there with regards to this alienation, because it may pose a security threat. In conclusion, I think the violent protest or violent conflict or violent engagements among South Africans is on the rise, which is something that is very clear. And secondly, citizens seems to have lost confidence in the state. And now what do we do about that? I mean, we'll have to consider the role of civil society. And I know Abba in his concluding remarks also speaks about us, you and I as citizens. What can we do as citizens? And a good example is Kwesi's example on community policing. So the role of civil society needs to be taken strongly, seriously. And even in this meeting today, we've had respondents from government and business, but not much from civil society, except for MISTRA having produced this excellent research report. But also, how do we harness this idea that of innovation amongst our citizens? Because South Africa is considered as one of the most innovative countries in the world. How do we tap into that in terms of the just transition, but also this noisy democracy that is also very youthful in nature? How do we harness that to take the country forward? And I think with that said, Che, I will leave it there, but thank you once again for attending, and thank you for participation, and thank you for all the comments, questions, and remarks, because it will also help the MISTRA team to refine the thinking going forward and hopefully managing to produce these macro-social reports going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Xolelwa, and thank you so much to everyone that participated in the discussion today, our panelists as well as our audience members. There can never really be enough time to discuss such complex issues, but we at MISTRA feel very privileged and honored to provide such a platform. And we do hope that these engagements will continue because we covered very broad topics, and MISTRA continues to cover most of these topics in its current research and as well as its past research. So we hope to see you in our next engagements. Thank you so much. I do also want to thank our partners in producing this report, UJ and the presidency, but also a special thanks to Anglo American for having sponsored the production of the research. And yeah, thank you to all colleagues that also helped in planning and coordinating this event. Thank you so much, colleagues. That brings us to the end of today's event. I hope you all have a great afternoon further.
Bye. Well done. Thanks, guys.